Hello everybody, I hope everyone's having a great Wellbeing Congress, having lots of good conversations.
Yes.
Yeah, my advice, having been to lots of these over the years, is have as many conversations as you can. It's amazing what tips you can take, what connections you can make. And I think I'm qualified to say that because my first REBA experience was the very first one back in, I thought it was 2016, but Phil Hain told me earlier that it was 2015. So was anyone else at that event with me in the Shard in 2015, 2016? You're making me feel really old, the fact I was the only one there. But thinking about how the market has matured since then, it's brilliant. Probably 2/3 of these providers weren't around then. So much innovation in the space, and it's been really exciting to see. Thinking about our own specialist subject, financial wellness, thinking back over those 8 or 9 years, I think that the main takeaway for me has just been a lot more consistency as to what financial wellness is. So 10 years ago, when we launched Nudge, if I'd asked 100 people, how do you define financial wellness, I probably would have got 50 or 60 different answers. But there is a lot more consistency now in the market, and it tends to be people recognizing that it's somebody's relationship with money, and that's underpinned by behavioral psychology. It's a very, very emotional topic, of course. And in terms of us as an organisation, for those who aren't aware, for those last 10 years, we've been using nudge theory, hence our name, to really get people to lean in to their dreams and their goals, and all of that underpinned by behavioural, cognitive, emotional and social processing. So we can help people identify those goals and then ultimately achieve them. And it's that topic which I'm here to talk about today. So everything that we do as Nudge is underpinned by data, and that's a combination of our own data. So we're supporting about 2 million people across 160 countries. So that's very, very revealing, and I'll share some of that. But also then external data points. So this latest research was conducted by Census Wide. You can see then the top there. They, in terms of kind of the credibility around that, they're regulated by the British Polling Council, MRS Code of Conduct, and fully compliant with the SMR principles. And they also work very hard to make sure that any data that they source is very representative of different ages and salaries and genders. And earlier this week, I wrote on LinkedIn about how I had taken a media detox. It was getting ridiculous. I was starting my day with Radio 4, then it was The Times, then it was Sky News, then it was Radio 5 on the way home, Newsnight, and it was just all a bit depressing. And it's not surprising, because that's how the media capture our attention, through fear and scaremongering. And I feel better for it. So I think as an antidote to what the media is pushing out, there is good news. There is good news happening, and I'll take you through some of that today. So at a very high level, comparing last year to this year, what Census Wide found is that there was you can't really see that green there, but there was an 11% increase in the number of people who were feeling hopeful about their money. And I should emphasise, this is global. So there might be a couple of bits that don't entirely align with the UK and some of the stats that we heard from Emily. So sentiments are improving. So not only are people feeling more hopeful, there are slightly less people feeling more anxious globally as well. And I think it's clear to understand that a lot of this has been driven by you guys. And so I think it is it's difficult with well-being investments to really know the impact that you're having. But I think there is some kind of cause for celebration here, that the work that we're doing to reduce the stigma, get people thinking more positively and proactively about their money, appears to be working. So what does the picture look like globally? And quite frankly, this could be a session just in its own right. But if we think about some of those emotions that people will have with money, whether it's pride, hope, shame, anxiety, or envy, the two that kind of jump out for me, so that ashamed. So great that we are seeing 10% fall year on year overall about people who have shame, but it's very interesting if you look at the pink bar, North America, bit of a standout, much higher. And I'm not sure if you guys have colleagues in the US, or indeed, are US yourselves. Emily, I'm sensing your accent there. But having spoken to my colleagues in the US, they're not surprised to hear about that. The US, the home of capitalism, money is very prominent. And meanwhile, they don't have the safety net that we enjoy, for example, the NHS. So I don't think, that's necessarily a surprise. The other one that jumps out for me is around envy. Hope, I'm going to pick up on now. So that's that 11% rise that we talked about. But if we compare EMEA with LATAM, so EMEA being 52%, LATAM being 70%, that's interesting. It correlates with some other data in the research, where we asked people, how confident are you that you will be better off than your parents? And in EMEA, only 50% of people said that they'd be better off than their parents, whereas in APAC, 90% of people said that they would. So I think that's reflected well there. So what does that overall improving sentiment mean? I think one of the things it means is that people are thinking a bit further out. And a really good example of that is people having a goal. And having that goal is a positive, rather than stumbling from day to day, actually kind of putting your focus a bit further out. Now, that said, we shouldn't get carried away, because the largest goal, the most common goal that people have, is feeling secure. This isn't Lamborghinis and caviar, this is just feeling secure. But at least they've identified that goal and are working towards that. Similar problem, vast majority of people are seeing some pretty significant barriers to achieving that goal. So it's all very well having a goal, but achieving it isn't so easy. Now, in order to understand those barriers, we need to understand, what they are, and we need to understand, what's going on in people's minds. And so what we're looking at here is our own internal data, which we call nudgeonomics. So this is where we're playing back to our clients and the market, what's going on in people's minds across the world. And I think the bits there's a lot on here. The bits to focus on really are these call outs. And so if we pick up a couple, I've been doing a lot of work recently with organizations in Japan. And so I was quite surprised and kind of challenged my assumption and bias to see mental health as one of the top topics that people are learning about in Japan. There's a preconception, it's a bit of a closed culture. And so there's a lot of suffering in silence, but I think it's encouraging that people in Japan are looking to address that. I think the other call out, I'll save the maths for you, but 7 of those 11 boxes have tax included in them. And so with every election that comes, and we know there's lots of elections across the world at the moment, with every election, with every new piece of legislation, that creates complexity around tax. And so I wasn't surprised to see that. Retirement, wherever that mentions, I think that's positive, because that shows that people are thinking further afield. So you can start to see, well, that's a topic. And also really interesting to see how many references there are to couples' finances or family. And actually what we've seen is a number of organisations extending their financial education support to families. So of course, it's not just my financial wellness isn't just driven by my own behaviours, it's driven by that of my friends and family as well. So more and more employers are recognising the positive impact that they can have there. So with that in mind, what's the employee view? So what we can see here on the right-hand side, in short, people are feeling a bit more positive. They have goals, and they're starting to think about, how do I achieve those goals? And they see better understanding their money, so being more financially literate is a key way to do that. And then meanwhile, what they also recognise is that those people who are more confident are much more likely to hit those goals. And on kind of double clicking onto that, thinking about those goals. So as I said, great that 99% of people have a goal, but 93% of those people, the goal is just feeling secure. Perhaps won't be surprised to see that the older people are, the less of a less prominent that is. But I think it's all interesting all the same. What's interesting though is although 93% of them want to feel more secure in the future, a key way for that is saving for retirement. There's a big gap. So 93% want to feel more secure, but actually only 56% of people are positively taking the actions, i.e. saving for retirement, to do that. And as a result, unsurprisingly, only a third of those people actually feel confident about achieving that goal. And you can see here, big disparity there between male and female. And so it was really interesting hearing what Emily talked about there. Women are, I think you explained, more likely to be suffering poverty. There's a kind of a cause and effect relationship here, no doubt, between that confidence as well. What I do think, though, is this disparity between men and women provides a really good example to kind of demonstrate the efforts behind DE&I. I'm sure lots of you have very active efforts around DE&I, and by tracking, how women's savings rates are changing, or perhaps their contributions to share saving plans, or those types of things. I think that's a really interesting way for you to measure, particularly for the cynics, that your efforts in DE&I are working. Women's behaviours are changing as a result. If we then start to explore some of the barriers for why people aren't able to achieve their goals, there's a lot of kind of unsurprising pieces there, whether it's I haven't got enough money, or I've got debt, or I've got other responsibilities. But the one that I want to call out there was don't feel confident. And so what we can see on the chart here is across the world, the proportion of people who feel very confident in their financial literacy and therefore their ability to achieve those goals. A few call outs here. So again, I'm going to pick on Japan. It's at the front of my mind. So for those of you who have done any work with Japan, you might know that they're coming out of a period of very long negative interest rates. So it's 20, 25 years of negative interest rates. Interest rates in Japan are now positive. Meanwhile, it's a very expensive place to buy a home. And so there's a lot of people who are worried. We're seeing that worried in terms of the costs of their mortgages. Latin America is very interesting as well. So Brazil, the government in Brazil made a concerted effort, I think it was 2010, to actually invest in financial education in schools. And so there's obviously lots of challenges in Brazil, but in terms of people being aware of their personal finances, the confidence behind that, I think that's reflected in that 46%. Compare that with Argentina, where some of you may be aware that Javier Milei is I'm not sure if it's president or prime minister, the right terminology. He's been in place for 200 days now, and he's ripped up a lot of their legislation, all of the powers now with landlords rather than renters. He's trying to equalize the peso with the US dollar. And as a result, perhaps unsurprising to see how poor the confidence is there. In terms of, though, the power of that confidence and how important that is, so this is pretty striking. So for those employees who have a plan, 91% of them are confident that they're going to achieve their goals. Whereas for those people who don't have a plan, unsurprisingly, it's only 60%. So it's really important to give people the tools and the environment and the support that they need to create that plan. And so thinking about you as an employer, what we can see here is that, and I've lost my notes, where have we gone? So of course there are those macro matters, that there's a lot that people aren't going to be able to do about, but there is a lot that people can manage themselves from their own self's perspective. And one of those is better understanding money, so that financial literacy piece. Not only does it create that confidence, but it gives you the resilience to be able to deal with those macro matters that are out of your control. And so what we can see is that those people who are confident, they feel that they've got that strong financial literacy, they're 4.6 times more likely to have a plan than those people who don't. And then meanwhile, as we can see, 82% of those people who believe that having a better understanding of the money are going to increase their chances. So it all comes down to getting people to think more openly and more proactively about their money. And that comes from financial education, financial literacy, creating a plan, and the confidence that comes from that. If we think about this from an employer's perspective, so only the negative here, I guess, is that only 40% of employees believe that their employer wants to help them. But the positive is that's a big increase on the year before. So again, evidence that the work you're doing is working. People are recognising that with almost a third increase there. And then what we can see on the right-hand side in terms of how that overlays with the organisations who are doing something, it's only 12% of people of organisations who aren't or say they're not going to provide some kind of financial education, and that is shrinking year on year. So to conclude, the research shows that there's this lovely relationship between confidence that comes from people having a plan, knowledge that comes from financial education, and then the other support that you as an employer are able to provide by way of your employee benefits. That might be a product like WageStream, it might be an EAP, it might be a pension plan, it might be insurance. But if you bring all of those things together, what you can then do is help people identify and achieve those financial goals. And that's good for the employees. It's good for you. I haven't got time to talk about the business case, but hopefully the fact you're all here, you recognise that's good for you. But I think it's just generally good for humankind beyond as well. If you want to hear from a real life client talking about this, so we've got this webinar 10th of July, so a few weeks now. Latham & Watkins, who are one of the world's leading law firms, they've got 3,500 people across 14 countries, so they're going to be talking about this topic. And I think the world's a pretty uncertain place now, so it's going to be with an emphasis on creating stability in this age of conflict that we find ourselves. So thank you very much for your time. 2 minutes. Yeah. Is that enough for your question, Jake?
There's actually a lot of questions in the chat. So there's 4 questions in the chat, so we're not going to get through them all. And therefore, I'm going to ask my question instead. So I was interested in your penultimate slide, you talked about helping employees set and then achieve the goal. So, what does a SMART goal look like? What does a good financial goal look like? And how can employers help their workers to come up with one?
Yeah, so I think it's very personal. And if you want to see kind of how broad spread they are, please do have a look at the research. It's quite extraordinary how different the goals are, not only individual to individual, but how those kind of trends cluster across the world. Thinking about, though, how an employer can, once people have identified their goal, how the employer can support the delivery of that. I think there's a few things. I think it's firstly helping people realise it's realistic. We've all probably got employees who aren't saving anything for their pension, but they have an ambition or a goal to go travelling around the world in retirement. So I think there's a big piece there. I think it's providing that ongoing support. So it's all very well somebody coming to that subject, coming to a pension webinar in May, because that was a convenient time for you to run it. Are they still going to remember what they were learning 6, 7, 8, a few years later? Probably not. So it's providing this ongoing support. I think it's about rewarding people as well. So one of our clients is Delta, the US airline, and they have this amazing scheme that is championed from the top. So Ed Bastian, the CEO, they've recognised the link between financial stress and behaviours and productivity for the business. So through their financial education provider, which happens to be us, they earn points. And every point that somebody earns equates to $1 that the employer will pay into an emergency savings pot on the employee's behalf. Now, that costs billions, and most of us don't have billions, but you can get some creativity about how you can kind of reward people for that. I think it's about showing progress as well. A bit like when I got my I was going to say TomTom, but again, that makes me sound very old. My sat nav in my car showing I'm getting closer to my destination. It's about showing that progress. That helps me. And then it's about celebrating success as well, and recognizing success and getting people to talk about it.
Great, thank you very much. What stand are you on?
We are stand 3, Tristan, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah,
Stand 3.
so just over there.
So there were 4 or so questions. Some were about the methodology, some were about what Nudge do, and so whoever asked those questions, go and catch up with the guys
I'll
throughout
stand
the day.
here for a bit as well,
Yeah.
if you need.
So, but if we can give Tim a round of applause.